Warning! This podcast contains spoilers, swearing, violence, gore, rampant xenophobia, and sexy talk.
That means it's for adults only.
But most importantly, the transformation we discuss here isn't real.
So don't go blaming us when your extraterrestrial dumpster dive goes all prawn-shaped.
Welcome to the 4th episode of the Shifty Bastards podcast. My name is Crafty.
And you can call me Llaga.
Before we get going, I just want to say that we have a new format for the show. So instead of the blow-by-blow breakdown we've done on previous episodes, we're going to focus on a single Shifty Bastard. So, that said, which Shifty Bastard have we got in our sights today?
We're vivisecting the crustacean of the month, Wikus Van De Merwe.
Did you mean Wikus Van De Merwe?
That's right. We watched the 2009 sci-fi mockumentary District 9. We're making our own first contact with the M. Night Shyamalan of South Africa, Neil Blomkamp? Blomkamp? Oh.
Neil Blomkamp. Why don't I just go ahead and add him to the list of directors we can never interview?
Now that we've recovered from our complete lack of culture shock, we see all the insecurities of the overprivileged and vicious human caricatures. Like, the actors did a great job, but the characters themselves are so two-dimensional.
No matter how cartoonish the characters themselves are, the racism was dead on in this. I did not have to suspend disbelief when it came to how racist people were behaving.
It was very disheartening, wasn't it?
It was super disheartening. Not only that, but this movie seems to borrow a lot from The Fly, as does Wikus's transformation. He loses teeth, fingernails. It's great.
With his transformation, I was hopeful that he was going to also change in his headspace to come to terms more with what is going on, and the people around him also trying to change, and in a perfect world they would have become better people. But in all honesty, that's not what happens in the headspace with pretty much any of the characters here.
That's true. They don't really seem to change that much. Wikus himself is clearly still a douchebag.
Yeah.
Like, all the way through. The only difference being that he has a moment or two of genuine empathy. But before we talk about what Wikus turns into, let's get under his skin and see what makes him tick before the transformation. Wikus Van De Merwe, played by Charlton Copley, is a nebbish Afrikaner bureaucrat, according to Wikipedia.
He's a never what?
A nebbish Afrikaner bureaucrat.
Alright.
Nebbish is an Old English word that means a person, especially a man, who is regarded as pitifully intellectual, timid, or submissive. It comes from the Yiddish nibble for poor thing.
Thank you, Thesaurus.
You're welcome, Antithesaurus. It's like an antithesis.
I don't have a lisp.
Antithesis.
Right out the gate of this movie, it establishes that Wikus is basically a Coney Island whitefish given human form. He looks like he needs to be stuffed into a trash barrel. We have yet another cockroach of a person.
Cockroach is right. He literally skitters away from Kubis, the head of the Cowboys.
He's wearing a sweater vest with an over-the-top mustache, which looks like he came from a reboot of the Mr. Rogers, but got rejected for bad touching Henrietta Pussycat during the audition.
Meow means meow.
I like that.
Meow means meow.
meow.
Yeah, he's got the sweater vest and the mustache to pull off bad touch Mr. Rogers.
He's a fumbling buffoon. Yeah, he has no sports prowess. Anytime he's given anything to actually do with his hands, he tends to drop things. At one point, he ends up shooting somebody, and it's like a miracle that he was in the general direction.
And it could be that most of that was the weapon itself doing the work. Because it's like lightning, it automatically went to people who
Yeah, it did kind of like vaporize the guy.
It towards his victims.
Yeah, idiot-proof it. Christopher's like, I thought you said you didn't want to hurt anybody. He's like, what did they shot me?
Yeah, has no qualms contradicting himself. He's not terribly bright.
Well, that's partially because his character never needed to be. He was the right color, the right gender. He married the right person. The reason he has his job is because he is now the son-in-law of the guy in charge who just promoted him way the fuck over everybody else. he has no redeeming value that he earned himself.
Yeah, he starts off in this story representing everything you can get from white privilege and nepotism,
Yeah,
while not having any real ability.
that's because he has the birthright. He is the cliche white man. You know, if you wanted to have as a white person as a stereotype, a negative stereotype, that is what this character is.
And that's why they add things like a seemingly cavalier lack of empathy for his fellow human beings and the prawns as well.
As he changes, as he morphs, I was so hopeful the personality would go with that he would learn some level of empathy. But as we watch this process, he really just doesn't seem to ever think beyond himself. He has no value on anyone else's life other than his wife. That he still loves her and wants to be with her. And then all the 3-year-old logic that he follows to try and get that to happen again. It seems like he wants to wish hard enough, then it'll work. The wife of his, who is the daughter of the director of the company, the father put him in that position because he wasn't going to let just some moron of his baby girl, Tanya, married, stay in a low-level position. And that being said, if Wikus had not married that woman, he then would not have gotten this promotion, and he would then not be going through all of this. This is all her fault.
No, it's not all her fault. If
he-
Wikus hadn't been such a shit,
Wow.
if he hadn't been so clumsy and so lucky,
Lucky. We're not saying whether it's good or bad.
for somebody who's looking for alien technology that could change the world and make them rule it, if not just absurdly wealthy.
After all is said and done, ask him at the very end, when he's got the little flowers, if he feels lucky.
If he weren't transformed, if he hadn't blasted himself in the face with the fuel canister and turned into a prawn, he would have called that a lucky find. His bosses would have called it a lucky find.
Yes. But the thing is that this is kind of like trying to find the silver lining on the cloud after you've been struck by lightning.
I'm trying to point out that it is incredibly unlikely
That he would have found this shit?
that he would have found it. Not only was it in a shack, but it was behind a false wall, and then furthermore, in that back room, it was in a lunchbox that was stuffed into a drawer. So he had plenty of time to search inside that little back room, let alone was extremely lucky to find it in the first place. He does not seem smart enough.
This is true.
However, I'm assuming he has experience with the prawns, but that's what leads to, damn,
It being all his wife's fault.
it being all his wife's fault, sure. Because he wouldn't have gone through all this if he didn't have that promotion. She helped him get enough rope to hang himself.
Yep. Maybe he's really well hung. Although that's going to go away once he changes.
That's right, because the prawns don't have anything between their legs that we can see.
Well, they do wear loincloths.
They wear loincloths, so maybe there's some modesty, maybe they just like decorating themselves.
They do.
They really
Did you
like
notice
decorating
they
themselves.
seem to be sort of like shades of hermit crabs and just glue weird shit? One of the funniest ones was the one wearing a bra.
Yep. Just wearing
That wasn't
this big-
actually completely fastened. It just
Nope.
had it over its shoulders and just kind of flopping loose.
a
and
big pink bra across its chest.
across its chitin.
Chitinous chest.
I wonder if that one was female.
Possible. I can't help but wonder if maybe they're hermaphroditic? And they're all just male, technically?
Possibly, but they breed.
But they never say her.
This is true.
They never say her. They always refer... They breed, but that doesn't mean that they don't use one pronoun for their entire species, because maybe they only have one gender.
Well, and while they do refer to Christopher as the father, that doesn't necessarily mean...
That he didn't give birth to the little one.
Yeah.
That he didn't lay the little one's eggs.
It's also gave me a little bit of an impression of the whole, like, maturity thing. You know, your body changes in a way that you weren't expecting. You kind of don't like it. You want to go back to the way you were. But too bad, so sad, you're stuck with it.
It's almost like this is Wikus's coming-of-age story. The sportsless milquetoast Wikus is not just lacking in physical prowess. He also seems to be woefully lacking in social prowess, in spite of the fact that he's climbed so high on the social ladder to have been put entirely in command of
that squad that he runs to try and evict all the people out of District 9.
So in spite of the fact that he's climbed the corporate ladder at MNU, Multinational United, a huge weapons manufacturer, apparently the second largest in this fictional world, he gets described by his coworkers as off.
Yeah, it was shades of people who were being interviewed after Jeffrey Dahmer was found. Oh, I always thought there was something wrong with him. If you thought there was something wrong with him, you would have said something. Shut up.
Half of the people were like, oh, there was clearly something wrong with him. The other half are like, oh, he was so quiet. I'm shocked.
Really, think about all the people that you work with. Look at them all. You know they're not eating people, okay?
You have a pretty good idea that they're not eating people.
Okay,
you don't know
I'm
for a
fairly
fact.
confident that they're not. I mean, the Italian dressing's really good, but that's beside the point. I've got some nice recipes for long pork. We'll talk about it later.
You realize that when it comes to cannibalism, social skills probably make it easier to get a meal?
Does it count as cannibalism if it's a different ethnicity? It brings out new meaning, too. Let's go for Chinese.
Yes. And that question is racist. Are Chinese people people? Because they're Chinese. Come on. You're better than that.
Okay, yes, I am. I honestly, I would never be able to bring myself to eat something that could say my own name. That means parrots are also out.
Parrots are out. So Wikus seemed off to his coworkers, and I think part of that is how he was always eating his foot and stumbling over his words and accidentally insulting people. But I think the other part of that was that inasmuch as he represents the uber-privileged white male in only recently post-apartheid South Africa, he also embodies the worst aspects of privileged humans in power. He lives in a very secure suburban home with his wife as a reasonably high-ranking corporate executive.
I did find it interesting that, speaking of the whole segregation concept, that while having the alien species now on the planet, most racism seems to have been basically put aside, and it was more of the talking monkeys against the talking crustaceans.
It's not that the racism was put aside, it's just that it was shifted off of all of humanity against itself.
True,
and
but
onto the prawns.
But that was only on the candy coating layer. I don't think it actually was completely gone, because if you look at the hierarchy, when you were looking at all the people that are up above, there were no minorities. It was still all ridiculously rich, overprivileged white men. There were no ladies in charge. There were only white, doughy men. And they were going to the point of being cartoonishly, and I know we've said this before, cartoonishly evil, but shades of having the snidely whiplash mustache. I mean, seriously, at one point they said to have somebody vivisected without any anesthetic because they wanted to see what it would do. That's just...
Yeah, they also, Wikus himself, besides how he treated the prawns, he treated his subordinates with the cavalier, you don't need any safety gear, you don't need a vest, you don't need a bulletproof vest, you don't need a gas mask, or anything to keep you safe from contagion.
Yeah, to be
he
fair,
genuinely does that.
The underling that you're talking about was supposed to be his replacement for the position he was just vacating because he just got promoted, who did happen to be a black man.
Fundisva.
Fundisva? That sounds like a cheese.
Fundisva cheese.
Yes. Okay, so
Would
the
you like
cheese
some
man.
Fundisva on your burger?
Yeah, really. I mean, what kind of name is that? I'm telling you, it's Scrabble tiles thrown on the floor. But anyway.
Yes.
So again, they were trying to cater a little bit to the, well, we're not racist anymore, blah, blah, blah. But it's, no.
Well,
not where it,
Fundisva,
quote unquote, matters.
while Fundisva was taking over his position, and while he didn't treat Fundisva very well, Fundisva at the end also called Wikus a victim of the policies of his company. And yeah, he's right.
That is true. In all honesty, that character, Wikus's wife, and the little child alien were the only decent people in the entire movie. Everybody else was a two-dimensional character shitheel.
Even Christopher?
Yes, I think that a lot of what he gave was a lie in order to meet his own ends, which, to be fair, I'm not faulting him. He wanted to get his child and himself out of this place and away. I don't blame him, but I think his motivations were suspect, which proves out at the end of the movie.
See, I disagree that he was lying outright about his ability to get Wikus back to normal.
He deliberately didn't say how long it would take because there's no reason for him to suddenly decide, oh, instead of I can bring you up to the ship and we can fix you, which is what got them to go to that plot point, then after they succeeded and he had what he needed to, scuttle along, he then says, oh, by the way, it'll take longer than I thought, somehow. It'll be 3 years. So you keep your ass here? I've also noticed that all the humans in this movie have more of an alien type name than any of the prawns. Well, seriously, it looks like somebody went, took a bunch of Scrabble tiles and threw it on the floor. That's your name!
Good job. Peter, you're Wikus, you're Fundiswa.
What is
And
that?
here's the prawn, Christopher.
Yeah, the alien is Christopher. And I still don't like referring to them as prawn, but I wish they gave us an actual name for the species. We are going to go a little more into what the species look like, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, but when it comes to a reason why you probably don't have a different name for them is because their language is based on a lot of clicks and hisses and isn't something that probably translates very well into English.
Yes, they can write, but again, the movie never even establishes them talking about it. They do not give them a name other than they're the aliens or the racists call them prawns.
Mm-hmm. I mean, everyone seems to call them prawns.
Again, the racists.
The humans.
Yeah, exactly.
Your planet is racist.
You're trying to split a hair that doesn't need to be split.
Yeah.
Everybody in this movie is some kind of bigot for some reason.
Yeah. Although there are some activists too, so not everybody. There's some activists who hang out and almost manage to blockade the camp to keep out MNU. But MNU has so many weapons.
Does the little kid ever get a name?
No, they never name. They just keep. Christopher always calls him Little One, him or her.
He refers to him as his son.
Son, okay.
Another thing that kind of shows the epitome of Wikus before he does all his changing. I think he's summed up best when he finds that shed that has a nest of the eggs for the aliens. And as he decides then he wants to go and explain how they're taking care of their babies, that it's a nursery for the eggs and they're being fed. And therefore, if you do this, and he starts unplugging the feeding system for the babies, basically killing them, and offers the pieces of the apparatus to his trainee, the one who's going to replace him, saying, congratulations, this is your first abortion. He then says it's less efficient to do it this way, to just unplug them and let them die. Instead, it's better to just burn them. They bring in flamethrowers and set all the babies on fire, and then laughs about the popping sound as they burst out of their eggs.
You hear it? It's like popcorn. It's like, hear it popping? He's gleefully talking about the burning nursery.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, I'm personally one of those people, abortion is a hard decision. I'm not anti-abortion. If it's something that you need, not my business. This is the equivalent of some bastard just breaking in your house saying, you know what, I don't want you to have that, and yoinking it out.
Or a eugenicist burning down a nursery filled with black babies.
Yeah. And
because, this is not approved breeding.
Which is weird because in a way, if you listen to the people that are all pro-life, that's kind of how they seem to act like that abortion clinics are. It's as if people are like ninja breaking in to do these things on people who don't want it, which is really weird and getting a little political. I apologize.
That's fine. I have no fear of getting political. That's the point of this podcast, because everything we talk about when it comes to shapeshifting is going to have some sort of political ramifications. What if people could fly? Well, the FAA is then going to have to come up with some new rules for airborne traffic. What if somebody grows and becomes a different species, or suddenly splits and becomes two people of different genders but have the same mind?
What if you can fly but you get airsick?
Then you're going to have some very unhappy people on the ground. Just don't fly over any stadiums. That may be a no-fly zone for you.
I'm scared of heights.
You
That's why I'm this tall.
should never get the power of flight then. You will not enjoy it. So, we've talked about his physical and social prowess.
Or lack thereof.
Thank you. And it's this lack of dexterity and intellect that leads Wikus to stumble his way blindly into Christopher's secret drug lab, where for the last 20 years, the prawn known as Christopher has been refining fluid found in their people's technology for their ship so they can leave. He says it's so complex because so much can go wrong. Well, it's alien tech, so alright.
At this point, he ends up fiddling with the tiny thermos that looks like it should be holding some good quality hooch, and it turns out to be some kind of form of alien Axe body spray.
He then looks at it and says, "It's not a weapon, but I don't trust it. I don't trust this, see?" And as he's fiddling with it and trying to look like a big expert in front of his cameraman, he manages to blast himself in the face with a spray of the ichor.
Squirts himself in the face like it was a bukkake.
And that is the point of exposure.
It seems to be like an antifreeze-looking substance that they take out of some of their lost technology that their people have discarded in a regular junkyard for reasons. As he refines it, it turns into a strange black goo.
It looks like black ink.
And in between all this, we find out that one of the big problems with their tech, and actually it is mentioned in the beginning, is that their weaponry cannot be used by humans because it's genetically coded. Their fuel is this substance that is keyed only for their species. Wikus can give himself a bukkake with it, and then suddenly, big reveal here, he's able to now use the alien weaponry because he is being reprogrammed. They also never establish why the dark goo would cause any kind of shape-shifting.
Let's describe the species he's going to be changing into, the prawns themselves. These aliens are usually at least a head taller than the average human in their adult form. They're symmetrical bipeds with 2 arms and legs, and they seem a good deal stronger than us lowly humans. Physically, anyway, without any weaponry.
The aliens are of an insectoid appearance.
We say they're insectoid because they have a chitinous exoskeleton with thick little hairs here and there. They also have keeled breastplates above a recess for 2 little baby arms right where our solar plexus would be that are tucked into their thorax. Now and then you can watch the little fingers wriggling.
Start the reactor!
It gives a bit of that Quato feel, doesn't it? But there's no face down there. It's just 2 little tucked in arms.
Helps with groceries.
Yes. Having those extra hands, are you kidding? I could carry 2 bags right here on my front, as well as the ones in my arms. That would be fantastic. I would be able to carry in so many more groceries.
Yeah, picture your nipples as hands. There you go.
There you go. Or like 2 little arms hanging from your nipples. Neither of which is terribly attractive.
Hey, you know, piercings, body mods.
What would you even call those? Hamples? Nidgets? I guess if it
sounds
just
like a slur.
If it's like, yeah, it does, doesn't it? If there was a finger sticking from each nipple, those might be nidgets, like nipple digits. And then there's the head.
They do have such lovely large eyes, and for some reason they don't have sclera, the white of the eye.
The iris is huge.
Yeah, it fills the entire eye.
And their large expressive eyes aren't the only colorful aspect to their appearance. Their shells, or chitin, often have colorful patterns, to say nothing of when they decide to use scraps of clothing or junk to further decorate themselves.
I can't help but notice also They tend to all use paint. Sadly, some of it is also markings on their shell for MNU, shades of the tattoos in the concentration camp.
Yes, they seem to have a spray-painted barcode-like company logo
On their
the left
heads.
side of their head.
Which also makes me wonder, with some of the other colors, how much is it organic color, like their natural color, and others where they just painted themselves?
They could very well just outright paint themselves. And then on top of that, they'll wear the occasional bra or scrap metal plates with spark plugs for spikes.
They do have some antennae, and for some reason they seem to have a Cthulhu mustache. Don't know why.
They have 8 mouth tentacles and 2 pedipalps, much like lobsters.
Who's a pedophile? This is upsetting.
Pedipalps. They're the 2...
Oh, the little flipper arms on their upper lip.
Yes.
Why would you have thumbs on your upper lip?
Because it helps you eat your food.
Okay.
Imagine how useful that could be if you could just hold a cheeseburger to your face without using your hands. I can do my homework while eating a cheeseburger. Like, nom nom. This is really convenient. It's two little arms holding it up. Can you picture that? Oh, hey, White Castle. They would love
little
White
mini burgers?
Castle. Little mini burgers that they could just hold up. If White Castle had a cat food flavored burger,
You're saying they're not?
if White Castle didn't change the cat food-like nature of their burgers, then I'm sure those little pedipalps would be perfect for holding those sliders up to their...
It's just like those
tentacles.
weird synthetic meatballs and SpaghettiOs. I don't know what it is, but I still have to put it in my face.
White Castle missed out on some huge cross-promotional opportunities with this film. Just saying. So, with their mouthful of tentacles, they have a unique language that has a bunch of clicks, hisses, and guttural sounds that can just barely imitate human language.
It was almost like they were trying to make fun of some of the African dialects.
I think they intentionally used that aspect to make fun of people who make fun of African dialects that include the click. When it comes to language, if you point at any one language and say, this language is shit, what's with all the clicking? Can you slow down your clicks there? That sounds to me like the classic ignorant racist git telling somebody that their language isn't good enough. And here in America, that's a huge problem. There's a lot of people who adamantly deny the legitimacy of any other language, to say nothing of culture. No other language besides English is valid to them. To the point where they will even shit on the King's English. They'll shit on British people for having an accent or using a slightly different vocabulary.
Well, and as I've mentioned before, I'm a firm believer that if you cannot use the word enunciate and know what it means, then you can't give people grief about their language skills.
Yep, totally agree.
They are missing one mouth tentacle. Would they have a lisp?
That could very well be. Although, can you lisp while clicking? Is it a clisp?
It's a sexual organ, isn't it?
I've never found the clisp. Quite frankly, I don't believe it exists.
What if they get piercings?
Well, they've already got the other kind of accoutrements and accessories that humans use. The trick would probably be to find a place where you could
It would add for the clicking, wouldn't
punch
it?
a stud in, yeah.
Click, 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 click.
Click, 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 click. If they had a tongue stud in like a couple of their
Mouth tentacles.
mouth tentacles that
Yes.
they would actually rattle together. Well, see, I don't know. That might make them sound like they have an accent from a different region of their planet. Oh, the extra clicks there. You from the north? Lots of planets have a north, you know.
They have 3 digits on their hands.
They have the index finger, pinky finger, and a thumb. They look like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The only difference is that the turtles don't taper. They come to a blunt, flat end, but the prawn have tapered fingers. And on top of that, they even have a bit of an insectoid physique.
They are masters at having the hourglass figure. They have a wasp waist.
Yep, they do have a tapered waist and pronounced pelvis. They're very swivel-hipped. But unlike most insects, praying mantises aside, they are bipedal. So they stand on 2 feet, digitigrade, with the bridge of the foot elongated and the heel off the ground. So they walk on the tips, just like a wolf or a dog or a cat or anybody else with digitigrade legs. I just like saying digitigrade.
And boy, can they jump!
Positive stereotype or no, What an excellent demonstration of the typical approach the humans have towards describing the prawns.
The humans that were pretending to be humanitarians, they were going on about how they rescued the aliens from their stranded craft, and they seemed to be malnourished, and all these super mighty white things that they were doing as they put them into a concentration camp and forced them into basically a slum.
They seem to be malnourished and weakened, living in a fetid mess, So we took him out of the ship, we brought him down to Earth where it was a lot safer, gave him nice places to live under the sun, lots of nice trash to dig around in, because prawns, they just like to dig around in junk. That's what they do. They're bottom feeders.
They also compared them to drones, implying that they were all very simple-minded, incapable.
They're slow, don't take initiative, and all that crap. Those things that get said about people of browner persuasions. It's amazing how completely they managed to make the prawns look like every human who's been on the receiving end of that kind of racism. You are inherently lazy. You are inherently incapable of understanding higher concepts.
This isn't anything new. It's something that they were even commenting on about America in general and each wave of immigration. Each new wave being saddled with whatever stereotypes and hate that was heaped on the previous. It doesn't matter what you look like. They did it to the Irish, and you don't get much whiter than the Irish. Okay? I'm sorry.
It ultimately does not matter where you're from or the shade of your skin. Actually, that's true.
It's all about, you are not from here, I have a right to hate you then. Mm-hmm. It's really what it comes down to.
And there's no fucking excuse for that. This narrative about how lazy they are and how they need to be kept in those camps or they need to be segregated. How you need an arthropod apartheid.
Well, it's the willful ignorance, the whole, I want to be better than somebody else. Let it be somebody who's different from me in X way. Humanity's been doing it to itself for ages.
Racism is depressing. How about we lighten the mood with some talk of alien barf? We do get to see a couple of alien biological processes in action. At one point, they cross paths with an alien who vomits black effluvium almost on them, spews it at their feet.
Effluvium. Effluvium. You just wanted to say effluvium.
I love effluvium.
What the
Not
fuck
effluvium
is
itself.
effluvium?
I love the word effluvium.
Effluvium. It sounds like an element on the periodic table that got lost. It just escaped it effluvium away.
And, of course, we've said it enough that now I feel I have to look it up to make sure
Using it properly?
Yes. An unpleasant or harmful odor, secretion, or discharge. I'd say black ichor being barfed at you is unpleasant.
Oh, you could be into that.
And we also do see a couple of them get brutalized, which, while unfortunate, does at least give us the information that they seem to be red inside. So I think that they also have red blood. Another one that they come upon later, the one with the pink bra, wielding a spade, is relieving itself on a tarp, and it looks like it's gushing antifreeze from its groin.
Yeah, gushing is definitely the word, because it looked almost like somebody went and just slashed a big gaping hole inside a jug of antifreeze. So I don't know what their urethra looks like, but damn.
It's got to be able to open up to like the size of my wrist. It has to at least open up that much.
They do talk about how prostitution is a thing now between humans and the aliens. Morbidly fascinated on that. I wonder if they have alien dildos. Do they have like an alien Sibian? Could he interact with that?
An extraterrestrial Sibian. Fantastic.
Do you think it's got like those little face tentacles?
That would be hilarious. Would you also have to be a prawn in order to be able to use it? Otherwise it like devours your genitals. Speaking of sexuality, we do know that when it comes to breeding, the aliens lay egg sacs with a larval version of themselves inside. A non-bipedal, scorpion-like larva in a pod. Do they have a cloaca?
They could have one of those ovipositors.
Yes. So they lay the egg sacs and then they feed them, as we saw.
Yeah, while they're here on Earth, they had a cow strung up in their nursery, and somehow it was getting nutrients from the carcass of the cow?
They splayed it open, plugged a bunch of leads into it, had some sort of processing or pumping equipment, and that pumped the slurry from the rotting carcass into the pods. So it looks like they feed them offal, rotting offal.
It was pretty terrible.
Yeah, they look pretty gross. But I mean, these are the same insects that are obsessed with cat food. To them, cat food is crack. It tastes so good that they cannot help themselves, but when you hand them a can of cat food, they shove the whole damn thing into their mouths and crunch down on it.
See, I'm sorry. I think that was just shades of the writer being a bit of a dick. Borrowing from Alien Nation, where the aliens liked fermented milk, like sour milk, and that was their alcohol. He just wanted, like, it's an alien. They need to like something really weird. Let's make it cat food. Oh. Wikus also makes commentary about how it's perfectly acceptable to abort the babies that are still in the eggs, but as soon as they've hatched, it's no longer legal to kill them because then they are considered people. They were going to shoot little one and a couple others as they were going to Christopher's house for the first time, and that it's not okay to kill them after they've already hatched.
So the little one is, like us, a smaller version of the adult prawn. Considerably tinier, wears clothes.
Has a lot of that same glee, like the comparison of, ooh, we're alike. Ooh, I want to do this. Ooh, I did it. I made this work, even though he was told not to touch something.
The little one acts very much like a human child.
He is one of the most likable characters in the entire movie.
The little one's pretty damn charming, especially the sass he gives Wikus.
He deserves it.
Mm-hmm. So that's what the adults and the children are like. The species as a whole seems to be able to survive in an ecology much like ours. They can eat our food, they can breathe in our atmosphere, they're fine in our gravity. They have a social structure because they were able to live together en masse in a city-sized spaceship.
You are also overlooking the fact that the aliens do have their own writing. So they communicate well with each other, perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those that's kind of glossed over a little bit. Trying to dumb it down for humans, they tend to revert to graffiti.
And I'm assuming that that high level of linguistic prowess allowed them to create such incredible technology that allowed them to traverse the stars, as well as the organic tech that we mentioned was incorporated into all of their gear.
There is a whole lot of the whole genetic thing that they linked up with their tech, because apparently all the scavenge tech that Christopher was looking for contains this magic fluid, which is what he needs to make his fuel, and that fuel is the reason why Wikus is mutating?
That's what it seems like, yeah.
Why? But okay, moving on.
So, those are the prawn. That's how they look, act, and interact with humankind. That is what Wikus, the nebbish weasel, is going to turn into. If you're familiar with the Jeff Goldblum iteration of The Fly, you're going to see some similarities in Wikus' transformation. After he wipes himself down and pretends nothing is wrong, he bags the canister and continues to wander around the lab he found, discovering another storeroom, this one full of weapons, one of which he decides to bring outside and see if he can use it to leverage some information from Bumblebee.
The black and yellow jacket colored friend of Christopher. So he talks some smack to Bumblebee, gets smacked back and launched into a porta-john.
Just one kick, and Wikus goes flying.
Yeah, seems to have apparently broken his arm.
Gets patched up a little bit and has his arm put in a sling and a cast.
Which somehow, there's friggin' signatures on it.
There's signatures on it? I didn't even see that.
He has signatures on his goddamn cast.
Few people sign his cast. Well, hey, he's popular, even though he shouldn't be. And there's a little heart on his cast, too, on the back of his hand.
Which of the hardened mercs just drew a little heart on his cast?
After he gets his arm in a sling, he ends up trying to continue his work, but he starts to experience some side effects, like hot flashes. Is it hot to you guys? Is it hot here? Oh, I think it's hot. Are you gentlemen hot? So he's getting hot flashes on his way to the next stop, which is Christopher's home.
He tries to ingratiate himself to the little one, by taking a lollipop, throwing it in the dirt, saying, "Here, have a sweetie."
Do you look a sweetie, little one?
The little kid responds in what I think is appropriately as picking up the lollipop out of the dirt and pegging him off the forehead with it.
Yeah, that thing goes flying. It's great.
Yeah, when it hits his head, it goes zipping off screen. It was beautiful. He then gets pissed off about how he was trying to be nice to the little one and he was an ungrateful bastard.
So, when the little one's father, Christopher, comes out of the shack, Wikus gives him a talking to.
They have a bit of a back and forth where Wikus is trying to get him to sign the eviction notice, which, to be fair, most of the other aliens that they were speaking to had no idea what he was talking about. And he really wouldn't answer their questions, but he did basically bully them, offering bribes like cat food, which apparently they love, to get them to finally agree that yes, they did live there, and yes, they'll sign the eviction notice to leave. Here, he's talking to Christopher, trying to explain that it's an eviction notice, and Christopher talks back, intelligently, in his own language, saying, "This says I have 24 hours. Wikus's response is, "I just need you to sign it anyway." And Wikus then turns back to his colleagues to say, "Hey, this one's smarter than the others," which again is why I think that he does understand what they're saying. He's just been glossing over their commentary back to him, similar to a phone rep when you call into some office to complain about your bill.
This guy, he thinks he's smart, so he's not signing. So we got to try other things. And that's when he decides to use his son, the little one, against him, saying that they're going to put him in an orphanage. So Wikus goes inside the shack to go and get the little boy, as Christopher is being kept outside at gunpoint. But before he can actually find the little one, he starts to get sick, goes outside, and power vomits the fuck all over the place. Much like in The Fly, where Jeff Goldblum's character acquires a desire to vomit on his food in order to be able to digest it like a fly does.
Slightly different. Wikus wasn't trying to eat anything at the point.
That's true. Though he does get really, really hungry afterwards. But power vomiting, as part of a transformation...
That's been established as a thing?
Yeah, getting sick.
Is that all transformations, or is it just insectoid?
It's not all transformations, and I doubt it's just insectoid ones. I think it's just something that shows up in body horror movies that involve transformation. Losing the contents of your stomach is something that shows up when your biology is apparently being entirely rewritten.
I love how often he's like telling the camera to turn off and stop filming.
Yeah, and he's splattering people with chunks. Touches people and cameras and things with his hands. He's got gunk all over it. It's really gross.
So after harfing and embarrassing himself all over the shed, he decides to take off and get something to eat.
They get into the APC. They ask him if he's okay. He's just a bit dizzy. But he's also hungry. So he has a suddenly very healthy appetite.
To be fair, he did just empty.
Yes, he just emptied. They decide to pull up to Gunther's, and it looks like he's having fun mowing down on French fries and Schnitzel and a nice cheeseburger.
All while having black ooze kind of trickle out of his nostrils.
And into his food. It looks like ink dripping from his nose. Like he's got a runny nose, but it's black ink coming out instead.
If a squid had a nosebleed.
If a squid had a nosebleed, yes. So, one thing I want to note about the hunger aspect, that's another thing that shows up in transformation media all the time. If somebody's undergoing a transformation, they need more energy in their system in order to be able to change. So for their body to actually have that much energy, they need to eat more food. And it's just one of those things that shows up from time to time. There was a Doctor Who episode with David Tennant, The Lazarus Experiment, where Professor Lazarus turns himself young, but at the same time has a nasty tendency, after the procedure, to transform into a vitality-sucking humanoid scorpion monster. So as soon as Dr. Lazarus steps out of his transformation chamber, one of the things he notices is that he's incredibly hungry. He mows down on nearby hors d'oeuvres. And the doctor looks at him and says, yeah, that's energy deprivation. It's one of those themes that shows up all the time when somebody's transforming.
The Relic, which is another movie we should actually take a good look at some point.
We'll review that later. Okay, we'll do the Relic in the future.
Lots of eating involved and not very consensual.
Oh, non-consensual vor. I got it.
Yes.
Awesome.
We'll see that one later.
So his suddenly healthy appetite is cut short when he finds himself
Leaking
dripping
all over his food. And, his fingernails start to slough off, but it would have had more weight to it if they didn't have a continuity error in the movie. Like, as he's starting to deal with it, there's the security camera that seems to be aimed at his desk for reasons, and his nail is sitting on his paperwork. He then starts poking at his nails, finds one comes off, and then the nail's no longer on his paperwork. It's like they just totally shuffled all those scenes together.
And that was another thing that was very much like The Fly, with his fingernails coming off.
Well, they do have chitin, although that makes me kind of wonder. So what's that doing to his skeleton? Is it dissolving within?
Can't help but wonder.
Do they also have a skeleton as well as the chitin? That seems redundant.
They may, because they look like they have an exoskeleton, they could also have bones. But if his bones are dissolving as he's growing chitin, I would hope the chitin develops first, before his bones finish dissolving. So Wikus can't handle his fingernails sloughing off and decides to call it a day. He just, for some reason, can't concentrate on his paperwork with all those fingernails falling out. So he decides to go home for the night, pulls up to his cushy digs in his barbed wire encased home.
Yeah, gets out of his car that has metal sheets and grating over the windows, all a la Mad Max, and then goes inside to tell his wife how he's not feeling well, he doesn't know why the lights are off, and he's pretty sure he shit himself.
And just after he says he shit himself, the lights come on, and everybody knows in his personal life is there, including his boss, the father-in-law, to throw him a surprise party in celebration of his promotion.
While he tries to go through the motions and stay upright, admittedly, the poor thing is looking mighty peaky. He's got dark rings under his eyes, he's wobbling all over, his hair is a total mess.
After everyone's said their hellos and told him how proud they are of him and what the hell happened to you? Why is your arm in a sling? You look awful. Peter, his dad, the chief director of this chapter of MNU, takes him aside, gives him a bit of a scolding and tells him not to fuck this up or he'll find someone who won't. At that, Wikus excuses himself to the bathroom, cleans up a little bit, and then puts on his game face to go out and help cut the cake.
As he makes his valiant effort to try and cut the cake, he's standing there with a ridiculous little party hat, holding the knife, slowly carves into the cake, which is blacker than friggin' coffee grounds, then proceeds to have blurry vision, wobbles, throws up all over the cake and the hors d'oeuvres on the table, tries to wipe up the black spew with some paper towels, and then proceeds to collapse on the whole thing.
And all the while, there's a high-pitched whine in his ears. It could be the trauma of what he's going through, or it could very well simply be his prawn senses coming to life, being able to hear higher register sounds or whatnot. Not that we really have any indication that the prawns are able to do that. They seem to be just as perceptive as human beings.
So next we're brought to the hospital.
When he wakes up
on a cot
in a hospital, as the doctor is examining him, he's talking about the symptoms he's been having as the doctor is cutting away the cast on his left arm for a closer look.
Yeah, he's explaining about the black stuff out of his nose, his fingernails falling off, his episodes of being dizzy. So yeah, with that cast opened, he unfurls his new fingers,
of
pseudopods.
Which there are 2 and a thumb.
And he now has a chitinous shell on it. He proceeds to, appropriately in my mind, freak the fuck out. I don't blame him, although I am mildly curious. The doctor, who also is obviously stressing, then decides to put a oxygen mask on his face, which makes him huff a few times and then settle down. So I'm thinking it wasn't actually oxygen. What the fuck was in that air mask that
Nitrous.
made him pass out?
Nitrous. The
Shouldn't
doctor was
he have
huffing
been
too.
giggling?
Maybe he was too frantic to giggle. I bet it was oxygen. I wouldn't be the least
If you
bit
get
surprised
enough
if it was
oxygen, you pass out?
Yes.
What? Is that a thing?
You get giddy and goofy, and you could pass out.
Well, that's nitrous. Oxygen does the same thing?
Oxygen does the same thing. While the doctor's cutting off those bandages, he does say that there's a lot of suppuration, or pus. So there's another symptom of the transformation that also does show up in other transformation media. It's very much like the way your body handles a wound, especially a really deep one that maybe hasn't been cleaned properly.
Not to mention, pus was also a byproduct from white blood cells fighting an infection. The change to his DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And that would also, if his white blood cells are on the rise, that would explain why his hot flashes, because you get a fever.
That makes sense. So he's literally fighting an infection.
And not to go too much into further in the movie as a spoiler, but they do put out into the media that he got this from having sexual congress with the aliens. Therefore, that makes me wonder, do they believe this is an STD? Are they space crabs? Space herpes?
Like from Ice Pirates with Ron Perlman.
Ron the Man, Pearl Man. I love that man.
He's pretty damn amazing. Unfortunately, he's not in this movie. So if only he'd been in South Africa when they were filming this, we could have had, Ron Perlman as Kubus.
Also, when you open up a cast, then maybe it's like the cocoon for a caterpillar. Because doesn't the caterpillar liquefy and then reform?
Yes. Supposedly, a caterpillar basically dissolves within its cocoon and then kind of recongeals into a butterfly.
So if he had a full body cast, would he have actually sped up the process?
That's quite possible. The reason that arm was in a cast was because it had been so thoroughly tenderized by Bumblebee.
Yeah, it probably broke up the bones, and that makes it easier to relocate the Titan.
As he transforms, it might also technically be healing him.
Yeah.
But instead, it's using the genetic information for the prawn to replace what's been damaged.
Yeah.
So I could see that accelerating the issue. So once his hand is discovered and Wikus has been put to sleep,
The doctor rats him out to MNU.
MNU security sweeps into the hospital and brings him to their headquarters. There, they hose him down, they poke and prod him.
Oh, no. You are not going to say they hose him down. No, they pressure wash that motherfucker. He is strapped to a table, shackled there. He's wearing just those hospital pants. Mm-hmm. And you hear him screaming as they have this high-powered pressure washer hose just spraying him all over the place. As he's just like, I tried not to pee myself laughing. That was so... He was such a flaming douchebag. I'm still having a super hard time feeling bad for him.
As enjoyable as it was to watch Wikus get pressure washed, it is another example of ways in which black people, at least in America, have been treated during the civil rights movement that he, as an affluent white man, is now experiencing firsthand.
And this is basically when he now transforms from being a patient to a specimen.
This is 16 hours after exposure. So they wheel him into the weapons lab and strap him into a chair on which they end up mounting a variety of different weapons that they've taken from District 9. One after the other, they wrap his hand around the trigger and hit his bicep with a cattle prod to make him pull the trigger and fire the weapon. Even when he agrees to do so, they still hit him with the cattle prod. And at one point, they even switch hands. So they show that not only does his prawn hand fire a weapon just fine, but his human hand does as well. So whatever it is that detects the prawn holding the weapon, as opposed to a human, it sees through the fact that he has 5 fingers and skin. It still registers him as one of theirs. And we'll find out later that this ability carries over to other prawn tech.
Yeah, something that they didn't say overtly. MNU, again, being the second largest weapons manufacturer, has actually been working on a secret genetic program and is all about Wikus being half alien at this point. Because now, after using him and using a cattle prod to have him pull a trigger for no reason because he was willing to do it, they just decided to zap him anyway because, again, Snidely Whiplash was out of work. They needed to zap him multiple times. They had him blowing up a whole bunch of things. They decided they then want to dissect him so they can study and find out how to do the genetic splicing.
For the sake of getting the chunks while they're halfway between human and prawn, so they can study them at that stage of development. Which means they gotta cut them into pieces. Wikus, of course, hates the idea.
They are discussing this with his father-in-law, the director, who is totally cool with this, about having his son-in-law being put into vacuum-sealed canopic jars.
Wikus weakly reaches his hand out and puts it on his father-in-law's hand and says, please don't let them do that. And his dad just pushes his hand away very calmly and says, I'll take care of this. And he does. He gives the order to have Wikus minced for the sake of money.
It is one way to lose weight, though.
If I don't lose another 40 pounds, I'll never be pretty.
While they're going through the process of preparing him for being vivisected, the father-in-law made it back to Wikus's home to talk to his little girl and console her about how she should just let him go. He was never very strong to begin with.
And while that's going on, Wikus proves him wrong. He's strong enough to break free of his straps, grab a hostage, and fight his way out of the lab. Here's where we can see a bit of the social transformation, the stuff that goes along with the physical in every one of these movies, or at least should.
If it's well written.
If it's well written. And here they choose to show how he's gone from being a white, upper-class bureaucrat to scavenging for food in the garbage. Much like the prawns were described earlier on as bottom feeders, hence their namesake, he is now scavenging for food. He also steals a cell phone. Scavenging for tech is another thing that the prawns do.
He also stole some clothing.
So he could wander around slightly less conspicuous. He's no longer got that cushy lifestyle. He's in survivor mode.
But I do want to mention that even though his standing in society has changed, he in his headspace still hasn't. He's still entitled. Everything's all about him. When he left, he tried to go back home. The place was crawling with MNU people, and then had the nerve to call his house, bitch at the housekeeper that answered the phone, saying that it's his house, he wants to talk to his wife. He then used a payphone to try and talk to friends to get help because he thought he could have gone home but couldn't. What did he think was going to happen?
So at this point, he goes back to Gunter's to get some more food, which is right when the photoshopped image of him barebacking a prawn shows up on the news. Of course, the prawn's face is blurred out, but his isn't, because prawns have more rights than him in that instance.
Censorship is bad.
This picture of him barebacking a prawn is really interesting, because it looks like somebody photoshopped it. I can only assume it was somebody at MNU. So, does that mean that there's somebody in their graphics department that they specifically gave these pictures to and said, all right, we need this? If I were the artist they'd paid to do that, I totally would have put a title under it like Roachback Mountain or Throw Another Shrimp on My Bob, yeah? And if he did breed with a prawn, what would a half prawn, half human baby look like? I just can't help but wonder if they'd come out like the dragon donkeys from the end of Shrek. I'm making abominations. Prawns have layers.
So after the fiasco in Gunther's, everybody scatters. They are flipping out. He grabs a burger, throws some money on the counter, snarfs as much as he can, and then runs like a motherfucker as the manager comes out with a shotgun and starts blasting away.
And eventually, 31 hours after his initial exposure, he finds his way into District 9. Wikus calls home again to try and get his wife to take him back, but unfortunately, all he gets is a syrupy, saccharine, overly cheerful husband and wife voicemail message.
Cliché.
While it's super cliché, throws into stark contrast his life now and the one he came from.
Just after he gets that message, he then has to duck into the grass because MNU pulls up to try and find where he is. And they then take off again.
So MNU is hunting him down. All of Johannesburg is aware of him now. He has no choice but to slip into District 9 and scurry under a heap of garbage for the night.
48 hours later,
he wakes up in his shanty and goes out to get some breakfast. Now, one of the things that you need to know about District 9 is that while it is more or less being controlled by MNU and the state, within this concentration camp, there is a Nigerian gang lord named Obasanjo who's been setting up places where prawns can get food and cat food in exchange for more money than is necessary.
Oh, that guy is so brutal.
Obasanjo is a nasty piece of work. He's in charge of this
black market because they have illegal weaponry. He's the main badass, and he's in a wheelchair.
And while they can't use the prawns' weapons, they still barter for them. They trade a pallet of cat food for a military mech that would be priceless.
The people of Japan would wet themselves over this.
Yeah. So Wikus goes off to find some food, and he goes to a Nigerian chop stand and looks around. Do you have some hamburgers? Do we look like we have hamburgers here? We've got meat.
Don't do the accent.
I'm going to do the accent. We've got goat. Is that cat food? Yes, that's cat food. I'll take that. Give me some of that cat food.
Yeah, and I think he was actually asking for the cat food, not because he actually genuinely was craving it. I think it was that kind of seed planted, this is what I'm supposed to want.
It could also be that it was in a can and pasteurized, as opposed to a stripped goat skull.
Fair enough.
So he gets the cat food and he goes off to eat it, cracking open the tin and reaching in with his hands. He's enjoying it. He's clearly enjoying it. Then he gets pissed off as he bites into something. And it looks like he thinks he has a piece of gristle. And he spits it out into his palm after hurling the can angrily. And in his palm is a tooth. He starts to panic a bit, his hand trembling. He reaches into his mouth now and pulls out a second tooth. At this point, he's so distraught that he just wants to be rid of the whole affair and thinks maybe he can save himself some trouble by cutting off his alien hand. So he goes back to the meat stand, steals an axe, and lops off his thumb.
Yeah, he didn't have what it takes to actually do the whole arm, but at this, because it's gone from being just his hand, went halfway up to his forearm, and at the moment it's at his elbow. He couldn't bring himself to do all that, but now he's trying the thumb to see how that does, and then realizes he can feel pain. Pain is bad.
It still hurts. Darn.
I can't help but wonder, does he grow it back? I have a hard time telling.
When they show Wikus as a full-fledged prawn, he hasn't grown his thumb back.
Okay.
But we don't get a close look at that hand. He may very well have a stump that could be growing his thumb back.
We don't know how far away it is in the future.
Yeah. So after he cuts off his thumb, we see that there's some chitin now starting to poke through the skin on the back of his right hand as well. This is, of course, shortly before he hears MNU sweeping into the area and has to make a break for it again.
Well, he has been using a goddamn cell phone, calling his house multiple times. They are the second largest weapons manufacturer, so why the fuck would they not be able to track him down with a cell phone?
Yeah, and those conversations are really sad. He talks to his wife, and at one point he says, I want to hold you again. I want to comfort you. I want to come home. And she says, I don't want you to hold me anymore. I don't want you to touch me. And it's one of the most heartbreaking moments in the entire movie. As Wikus is back on the lam, we get a couple of shots of his scalp, which is losing hair in clumps and starting to look a bit mangy. This is where he ducks into another shack.
Come to find out, it's Chris's place.
Again, super fucking lucky for a given value of luck. Just stumbles into Chris's house, the one prawn who knew what was going on and could possibly help him.
When he first gets in there to the shed, talking to Christopher, he asks for help and passes out. Christopher sees the changes that he's been going through and says outright, even when Wikus is unconscious, there's only one thing that could do that to him. So that's why he decides to help Wikus so he can get his fuel.
He brings him down into the ship to interrogate him.
The ship, which happens to be hidden underneath that shed, which is a whole other weirdness that I'm going to go into later. But that also, again, brings me back to the other question I had. Is this something that they do on other planets? Because he's seen this kind of thing before. He recognizes it for what it is, knows what's caused it, and has an idea of what needs to be done to get it fixed. They've done it before.
Maybe they're out to seed worlds.
Get more drones.
I could see that. So during that conversation, Chris does let him know that they've got machines.
Medical machines, yes.
Medical machines up on the mothership that could return him to human form.
But only if they can get to the ship. And to do that, they need the fuel that was in the canister that Fucknut lost to MNU.
So disheartened, Wikus scampers away again, finding a little shack to hide himself in for a little bit, sets up some candles. It looks like he's going to rub one out, but he's actually inspecting himself in front of a battered mirror.
And admittedly, it ain't pretty. He wasn't, a pinnacle of sexiness to begin with, but at the moment, his skin has blistered and burst open in different spots, exposing the chitin. There's some oozing around, I'm presuming more pus leaking out, and he starts tugging on the loose skin, peeling it away, with a bit more goo, just to add for the whole visceral thing.
He rips it off, whinging, wincing, choking back sobs and screams. And after he's had a chance to look himself over and rip off a few scabs, he then sits down and weeps.
And then gets a call from his wife,
who wants him back. And Wikus is utterly overjoyed. He is palpably thrown. He is so happy, so thrilled. He will do anything she says. Of course, that was all just a ploy to trace the call. So he makes his way back to Chris's shed. He tells Chris where the canister is, and they hatch a plan to go steal it back from M&U. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens at this point. There's a lot of really good action. There's a lot of scenes of Wikus using various awesome pieces of alien technology, splattering people all over the walls.
Although, in order to get that alien technology, he decides he needs some of the alien tech. So he goes to Ubuntu, or whatever his name is.
Obasanjo.
He tries to purchase weapons, but that guy somehow has it in his head, using some mutated form of voodoo,
Muti.
has decided that what he really needs to be able to use the weaponry himself is to consume the alien. At one point, he's got like some prawn's arm, and I'm thinking just serve it up with some fettuccine, some Alfredo sauce, a little bit of garlic, there you go. But yeah, he's mowing on it, thinking that if he consumes it, he will then become it. And he's fucking crippled. If eating something then gives you the characteristics of that thing, then he wouldn't be crippled. He's had a burger before. He's had food from others. He's had other things. Hell, if he truly believed that eating something will make you become that thing, eat a goddamn human and be able to walk. Okay? He's so stupid and insane. He then decides Wikus, being a partial human, maybe that's what he needs. So he wants to take Wikus's arm and consume that instead. Ugh.
I want your power. Well, and technically, he is powerful. He may not be physically powerful, but he's the only human who can interface with the incredibly powerful alien technology.
On the news, as Wikus was running away, there was a voiceover commenting about how he is the most valuable commodity on the planet. They specifically called him a commodity.
So this becomes another social change for Wikus, as he is now a potential target for a Muti harvest. Obasanjo actually takes a knife and digs under the flesh a bit and then tastes it. Wikus is panicking, and Obasanjo is overjoyed. They throw Wikus to the ground, get ready to lop off his arm, but he manages to just reach a great big gun, which he uses to vaporize a few people.
The gun, strangely enough, looks very much like the orange portal gun.
It looks like the portal gun, yeah. So Wikus, with his newfound bartering position, steals a bunch of weapons.
And ran the fuck away.
And they took the guns and went with Christopher to M&U headquarters, which is where I'm sure a lot of the betrayal that the people they interviewed at the beginning felt was curried.
I like curry.
Well, and he managed to turn a few people into curry with his weapon.
Yes, well, you know. And all the while, MNU has its resources diverted because they've actually sent a crew off to the shed in order to collect Wikus. But as soon as they arrive, Wikus has already stuck his thumb in their bum, and they now have to come back to headquarters.
So after they manage to get the fuel canister back and vaporize a few more of Quobus's cowboys, Wikus and Christopher are already off and ready to plug the canister into the ship, when Wikus asks for a little bit of confirmation from Christopher as about how long it'll take once they get up there to turn him fully human again.
Which was implied by Christopher that there's medical machines on the ship that can turn him back. So we're thinking at first Wikus is going to hop in the ship with him and his kid, go up to the mothership, get the operation done, then go back home, and all roses, right? Not quite.
Because it turns out that Christopher thinks it'll probably take about 3 years. Wikus cannot handle 3 years. 3 years of prawn.
Like, I can understand being upset and even being pissed off. I get that.
That's no reason to clock Christopher over the back of the head with a shovel when he's trying to help. And it's probably the only living being on Earth who can or is willing to help him in any way.
Yeah, he knocks him the fuck out, hops into the ship with the little alien, and then tries to take the little scout ship to go back up to the mothership. But he can't fly it. And even if he could, let's pretend he knew what the fuck he was doing. When he gets onto the mothership, the thing looks like it escaped from Independence Day. It's bigger than the entire city. How is he going to find the medical stuff? How is he going to know how to do it? What is he going to do? What is he thinking? I hate people.
He clearly does not think ahead. So after he clocks Christopher, he scuttles down into the ship, lies to the little one that, oh, Daddy'll be fine. He's right behind me. We'll pick him up on our way. He clambers into the cockpit and manages to pilot the ship out of the ground. Just as Quobus comes in to the shack, finds Christopher unconscious or barely conscious, and drags him out of there before the ship can fully emerge. But of course, it's Wikus. He doesn't know how to pilot a fucking ship. He can get it going. He can get it up in the air, but as it clumsily tries to coast towards the mothership, it starts to wobble and spin a bit, and then one good missile to the fuselage, and he's going down in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, this missile is courtesy of Corbus telling him to fire it well. They blew up one engine.
Quobus goes and drags him out of it. So now Quobus has both Christopher and Wikus.
He doesn't know about the little one, though. And the little one is sweet as can be, does what he can, and now that the ship does have fuel in it, is able to trip some switch to make the mothership move for the first time in over 20 years and come pick them up.
It starts with a blaring siren. It might as well be Michael Bay's trademarked boom.
Yes.
It blows out all of the windows and sets off all of the car alarms in Johannesburg. And then the ship moves to District 9 and stops directly over the scout ship. When the little one hit the switch, that also woke up the mech. Now at this point, Quobus has Christopher in his truck, and Christopher is doing the smart thing and staying inside the armored vehicle, whereas Wikus has been abducted by the Nigerians.
Yes, he got taken from Corbus by the Nigerians because they decided to go all Mad Max, have a tricked out truck, run up and ram the vehicle he was being carried in, flip it over. They then saw through the doors to pull him out. They were shucking him out of that motherfucker like he was a pearl in an oyster.
Back at Obasanjo's place, it looks for sure like Wikus is going to be lunch.
Yeah, they're doing their ritual. They've got a machete that's been heated up. He's being held down. Some crazy lady is wielding the machete and about to take a swing.
And chanting over him. She's performing a Muti ritual to prepare their harvest. But, thankfully, that signal that went out from the ship woke up the mech that was behind them, the one that they bought from a prawn for 100 cans of cat food, and has an autopilot mode that recognizes that not only is Wikus a prawn, but he's also in danger. And it manages to vaporize the first person to notice, and everyone else then starts shooting at the mech.
Which has some kind of electromagnetic ball that it can make, and it collects all the bullets in this one little ball that kind of like hovers in front of it, and after everybody basically runs out of bullets, it suddenly launches them back in the reverse
It sprays them all
trajectory.
at once. It gathers the bullets in a little ball that's floating right in front of the end of its right arm weapon, and it's just holding them there as if in a magnetic orb, and then it sprays them out. They scatter and kill everyone but Obasanjo and Wikus.
It did with a different weapon blow a hole through Obasanjo.
It didn't blow a hole through him. It plugged a big fat taser charge right into Obasanjo's forehead as he was posturing from his wheelchair trying to look like a badass. Causes his head to swell up and then explode.
Like he had space mumps from Red Dwarf.
And that was the last of Obasanjo. So, Wikus, now slightly torn, decides, alright, shit's going down. I don't really have a choice. And he gets into the mech. And at first he's like, okay, we can do this. This is good. Harnesses start closing around him and coming into place.
It did look like it wasn't shaped quite right for a human face, and I thought that was why he looked so pained, because it clamped in and also some blood was trickling down his forehead.
This badass mech, like the prawns, is bipedal, digitigrade, has 2 arms, and has face tentacles.
Very much like you would see in an anime. You know, mechs tend to look like the human species for some reason. Why wouldn't the prawns also have their mechs look like them?
Yeah. So the first time they show Wikus get into the mech, they also zoom in on his face to show the harness closing around it. And that's when we first see that his left eye, like his left hand, has become prawn-like.
Just slightly. Although, that being said, as you see him using the mech, they keep zooming back in, and his eye has been getting bigger and bigger. The iris is larger, and you are seeing more of the prawn-style eye as he's running through. And I think that's actually being sped up because, again, he got wounded by the mech, and I think the healing process is expediting that mutation.
At this point, he uses the mech to help Christopher get back to his ship.
Well, after the mech shames him into it, because he did try to go at first after Corbus to get away, tells Corbus he can keep the prawn, referring to Chris, because he doesn't want anything to do with it, just let him go, and he runs like a bitch.
Again, scuttling.
Yeah.
How can you scuttle in a badass war mech? He found a way. He then stops because his mech picks up a transmission from Quobus's people that says, we're not going to get anything out of him. Just kill him.
And it replayed that audio clip several times to Wikus.
It's like the mech has its own AI. That's like, one of your guys is going to die. I'm just going to play this message over and over again until I'm sure you're aware of that fact. And that's enough to shame him into going back and fighting for Christopher's freedom. And there have already been arms blowing off of people, people turning into chowder and splattering the walls. But here's where we get the most gratuitous amount of violence. It is an all-out war between Quobus's cowboys and Wikus himself, as he's trying to escort Christopher back to the ship. And as we get a look at his great big yellow-orange eye, that August is also National Eye Exam Month. So, approps.
Yes, I do encourage, while I do joke about vision being overrated, if you still have it, it's not something to sneeze at. Get checked. You can even get some awesome contacts, just like Wikus is wearing.
And the actor did actually have to put in a big old yellow contact, and then they also, from there on,
expanded
did a
it.
CG as the eye got bigger. And after the big throwdown with Quobus, the mech gets disabled and kind of slurps Wikus out onto the ground. So as Wikus oozes out of the mech and flops onto his face, he comes to and starts to crawl away from Quobus, who is just all too happily staring him down, giving him all sorts of shit. A gang of prawns emerges and tears Quobus apart. But they completely ignore Wikus.
Chris, once he's been escorted back to the little scouting pod, gets into the ship with his son, and they trigger the tractor beam to go up to the ship.
And once up there, Chris sets the autopilot to bring the mothership home with him and his boy on board.
See, and that's one of the things where I'm saying this is where Chris is also a bit of a douchebag.
Because he didn't rescue any of his people.
Yeah, he initially said before they went to MNU to try and get the fuel and all that one of his goals is to rescue his people.
Yes.
Because of the experimentation they've been going through and all that.
So after Chris is safely aboard the ship and the ship leaves, we then get to see a few other scenes that remind us that this was a documentary style at the start of the movie.
Yeah, it's like they forgot it was supposed to be a documentary, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh, that's right.
That's right. We'll go back to the interview model, the handheld camera scenes.
Yeah.
The interviews with people and what looked like security footage here and there, like the security footage of Fundisva breaking into MNU headquarters and down in their archives, looking up the events that transpired and seeing the video of Wikus being sprayed in the face with the canister.
Yeah, he even comments about how that while they did try to cover it up, they did a terrible job and they were super lazy about it. As he's explaining this, he's wearing prison garb because apparently he's been arrested.
We then see his wife, who brings out a little piece of scrap metal that have been assembled into a decorative flower. Very reminiscent of the kitschy arts and crafts that Wikus used to leave around the house before his
change.
transformation.
Yes.
Then we cut to a prawn somewhere in District 9 or 10, as they do eventually finish relocating all the prawns to the new district. We see him building one of those scrap metal flowers for his wife, which she says was left on her doorstep one morning. So Wikus does not make contact with his wife except to leave her more kitsch. And unfortunately, because they skip straight from Wikus with the one weird eye, chitin sticking out of his skin, a changed hand, lost fingernails,
A few lost teeth.
we see him go from that straight to full prawn Wikus.
Yeah, you don't really see the in-between. You don't see how he ends up getting the wasp waist or anything like that.
Because we weren't able to see Wikus go full prawn, there were some opportunities that the writers had that we missed out on most. Like getting to see his feet turn digitigrade, which is one of those things that has been done before in transformation media and doesn't always get done right. Would they have made his knees break and turn backwards to become digitigrade? American Werewolf in Paris style?
That's not how it works!
They would have been aware enough of anatomy to elongate the bridge of his foot?
Yeah, the knee isn't going the wrong way for that. You just... Oh my goodness. Take a good look at your fucking dog, asshole. Look at the leg. Oh.
Is that bit that sticks out the back their knee in reverse? No, it's their heel. And this is another thing that they missed. They could have shown him enjoying himself like the other prawns were doing here and there, where we actually saw prawns doing parkour, running and jumping over the tops of vehicles, hopping from rooftop to rooftop, from shanty to shanty in District 9.
For the first time being athletic.
Feeling that freedom that is tantamount to flight. Can you imagine if somebody who was like 40 years old, horribly overweight, had arthritis in both of their knees and feet, had suddenly been given a new body that was capable of magic alien parkour, leap tall buildings in a single bound? That's the kind of joy that would be fun to have seen. Admittedly, I don't like seeing Wikus happy.
That's true. Well, it would have been fine if he also changed as a person.
If he emotionally grew up a bit. He only does that by a smidgen, and it's only because prawn technology and the hatred of the human species as a whole was levied against him.
Yeah.
All of those things made him all but forced. He's like, all right, I'm being shamed by technology and utterly ousted by my species. I am no longer anything more than a commodity to them. I am a shame, a terror, and a commodity. We also don't get to see the last of his surface transformations.
The antennae or the tentacles.
Or the tentacles for his mouth, or the pedipalps. Would the pedipalps have developed from his mustache? Oh, the extra arms at their solar plexus.
The nipple hands?
I would love to see him discover those. I would love to see, for the first month of him having those, he has to swap them away from his nipples. Something like that. The things you discover when you find new limbs growing. And of course, there's the issue of his genitalia. As much as we lampooned the idea of him starting his transformation from fucking a prawn.
Post-cloacus?
Post-cloacal coitus. That journey can be just as fascinating.
I don't think the word is going to be fascinating.
I'm special. So in between being a cracker and being a prawn...
He's a prawn-cracker.
He grows physically, for the most part. He doesn't get taller like the others, although that may have happened when he went digitigrade. But he does seem to gain a little bit of physical strength throughout. However, his emotional strength always stays pretty fucking low. It takes a lot of cojones to break into your old place of business and basically perform an insurrection with alien weaponry. But it's not the kind of emotional boldness that makes one a mature adult who's got empathy and cares about those around him.
That was more of a out of desperation maneuver, as opposed to trying to do the right thing. Everything he does in the movie is essentially self-serving.
As much as he is made out to be this movie's hero,
he is this movie's tragedy.
And that's it for episode 4 of the Shifty Bastards podcast. But before we scuttle back under our junkyard shanty, we'll get you salivating for next month's episode.
And that is going to be Shapeshifter from 1999. This movie looks so amazing. It's all about a boy who needs to save his ex-secret agent parents while protecting the planet from the evil powers bent on controlling the world's plutonium supply.
You can find it on YouTube. One of the descriptions for it is, "This movie defies description."
I have to admit, it looks like it is actually how Trump thinks the world works. That there's some spy kid that's going to be trying to save his former spy parents, and there's radioactive material involved, and magic.
And magic.
And magic. There's shape-shifting. Like, literal, he goes from one animal to another. Shape-shifting.
He shapeshifts from human to animal and back again. And he can turn into multiple animals, which is the plot of Manimal. But at the same time, in Manimal, they only ever showed like 6 different forms. So if the shapeshifter here can do more than turn into a bird, a snake, a panther, a bull, and a dolphin, then this one movie will have more transformation than the entire Manimal series. It looks like it has the finest special effects that $18.99 has to offer.
Yes. I was going to say, it ain't $19.99. They could have at least done better than that.
Yeah. I'm like, should I go back 100 years? That sounds hyperbolic. Perfect. So, if you enjoy our brand of madness, please consider hurling your disposable income in our direction at patreon.com/shiftybastards.
You'll get patron-only extended editions complete with bloopers, special readings, and other exclusive extras.
Reticent to hand over your hard-earned rands?
The fuck is a rand?
It's the currency in South Africa.
Oh. How about helping us with a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher? You can also find us on YouTube and SoundCloud.
Want to get in touch with the Shifty Bastards to correct our vocabulary?
Gush about your favorite transformation media?
Or scold us for our scandalous emissions?
Then we encourage you to tweet at Shifty Bastards on Twitter.
Thanks to everyone involved in making District 9.
And Peter Jackson, too.
Producer Burn. Thanks to my co-host, Llaga, for joining me today, as well as for getting us mentioned on the best podcast about law, Opening Arguments.
Check them out at openargs.com. Thanks also to Afrodeutsch for their incredible generosity.
The music used in this episode was Summon the Rock by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com and was licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 3.0.
Until next time, this is Llaga.
And Crafty.
Signing off.
And reminding you
to stay shifty.
The preceding podcast was a production of Meteor Press, LLC. Copyright 2017. All rights reserved.